Welcome to the LexisNexis Evolving IP podcast and today's episode, Via LA, Alliance for Patent Licensing. I'm Tim Pullman, and I'm joined by my co-host, Francesca Levois. Today, we are excited to welcome Heath Hoglund, president of Via Licensing Alliance, to our podcast series. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Heath.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Heath, thank you so much for joining us today. As I was reading up about you, I noticed that you've been given the top spot in the IAM list of market makers for 2023. So I'm delighted that we're able to speak to the individual that they've ranked the highest in terms of being the patent market's most innovative and influential deal maker and decision maker. So congratulations on that accolade.
Thanks. I joke that I sent in the best photograph, but it was obviously an honor, and we had a good year and have been actively involved in some interesting deals and projects. So was happy to receive that recognition.
It definitely creates an intrigue for our listeners to find out a little bit more about you, Heath, and what your background has been and how you managed to get to the top of the list of the market makers.
Sure. Happy to share a little bit about my background. I was with Dolby for 15 years, and maybe I'll just start there. I was previously a patent attorney and came on board with Dolby. At the time, I was hired as their first chief patent counsel and began with a team of one patent engineer. So that was in the mid 2000s and sort of grew that. Dolby obviously had been in the business of patent licensing for quite some time. And so they had primarily relied on outside law firms, but it was at a good time in their development to start to bring that part of the business internally. So I was hired in the mid 2000s and started growing the in-house patent team. So we began with patent prosecution and eventually grew and started taking over the patent licensing business, eventually became active in a number of patent pools, and then continued to grow, and over the years added some standardization teams and left couple of years ago for the new role at VIA, which has been another fun adventure.
And we'll get to your new role in a second, but given the number of years of experience that you have within the licensing arena, things have changed quite a bit in that time period, I would assume.
For sure it has. When you rewind time and look at how fast technology continues to develop, it's really amazing. I mean, I can remember getting my first cell phone, and that was not so crazy long ago, but the technology and the need for interoperability continues to increase, and the technology continues to get more complicated. It doesn't seem like there's an off-ramp from that, and there continues to be a need for different kinds of devices from different companies to communicate in different ways with each other. That definitely has happened, and at least from my perspective, is something that we'll continue to see going forward and plays a big role in the business, in the patent licensing business, obviously.
When we talk about patent licensing programs or patent pools, it's effectively giving access to the technology to multiple players. How do you think that the development of patent licensing programs and pools has actually helped the development of these technologies that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so MPEG-LA really, in modern times, started one of the first really successful patent pools for the MPEG-2 video. And at the time, that was a new technology, and there was a number of companies that had contributed to the development, something like 10 companies or something like that. But it created a need for implementers to obtain rights to the patents of those 10 companies or whatever it was. And as things continue to progress, the more modern technologies continue to get more complicated, and there are more companies participating in the development of those technologies. And we continue to see a more expansive pool of patent rights that are relevant to some of the most important technologies that we use in our daily lives. And then that's really where a patent pool comes in, and it creates an opportunity that's beneficial both for implementing companies or product companies, as well as for the innovative companies that contribute to the standardization, because modern technologies, there can be many tens, even as many as 100 companies that contribute one way or another to standardization, and to go and have to obtain individual patent licenses from each of those companies would be a really overwhelming task. And likewise, for the patent owners to go and individually license every company that implements a particular technology is similarly just an overwhelming task. And so there's a unique opportunity there. And that's the role that we play, is creating a more efficient mechanism for providing access to product companies for patent rights, and also providing a path for innovators to reap the reward of their investment in innovation in an efficient way.
And Heath, you mentioned getting your first cell phone, and obviously you've just talked about technology moving on so quickly. If you think about the end consumer, probably the notion of patent pools and patent licensing programs feels very far away. How do you think the end consumer benefits from all of this?
In a couple of ways. One is that the technological development that's happened over the last several decades is just phenomenal. And part of the reason that happens is that there's a lot of companies willing to make investments in the development of new technologies. And that happens because there is a reward system for that investment, and that is through patents. So to me, in terms of how the end consumer really benefits from just the rapid development of technology that we see, at least in part driven by the system we have to reward investment and innovation. And obviously there's innovations that would happen without that reward system, but at least from my perspective, it happens a lot faster because there is an incentive to make investments in developing new technologies.
Tim, I'll maybe get you to put your economics hat on here. How are pools effective, or are they even effective economically?
Yeah, I think that many of the SEP licensing challenges that we have today can actually address through patent pools. I think patent pools are particularly useful in markets with a large number of standards implementers, but also patent owners. And in those cases, I think especially the implementers benefit from signing a single contract. But maybe even more is maintaining a level playing field that all market participants pay the same price, right? If you think about bilateral SEP license agreement, they often vary. They're leading to some companies may secure better deals than others, right? And I know some implementers really have, we call that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, surrounding the possibility of overpaying a SEP license, right? And that's not just about the royalty paid, it's also about the risk of paying more than a competitor who might then gain an advantage in the product market with lower prices. And a patent pool can solve that. You can be sure that the pool license you get, all your competitors get the very same price. It's even a price listed on the website. And I think if we look ahead at future markets, think about smart device sector, standards like Tree Wireless or IoT markets with devices with very small, sometimes even 2-cent location geo-trackers. Likely those markets will see a lot of small, medium-sized standards implementers. And these SMEs may have less than $100 million of revenue, and they lack budget, they lack experience, they lack leverage to negotiate a SEP license individually with all these SEP owners. Especially for the smaller, medium-sized companies, pools are maybe even the only viable solution to get access to the technology and get access to the patents that ensures reducing legal risk of being litigated, of overpaying for a SEP license. So I think pools can address many of these challenges that we have today.
100% agree with that. And one of the things that we see with our really successful programs, the AAC program, as well as, for example, the AVC program, which is run by MPEG-LA, those programs, each of them have 1,000 licensees. And of course, the big companies are licensees of those programs, the Samsungs and Apples of the world. But there's not 1,000 Apples and Samsung. There's a whole lot of smaller companies, and there's no way they have the bandwidth to go and figure out the IP landscape, and they really shouldn't. And it's absolutely one of the things that we hear from our own licensees. Obviously, nobody wants to pay if their competitor is not paying. So it's something that's really important. To me, it definitely creates a level playing field and transparency, especially for the smaller implementers who would not have that ability otherwise.
And Heath, so if you are that sort of SME, that organization that maybe has just come up with a product, but you're pretty small, what advice would you give that SME in terms of even starting to tackle how they get licenses? How do they even start looking at pools? What would be your advice to them?
The pools really are a simple IP solution, especially for small implementers. And, to follow on the same narrative, for really large companies, they would have the ability to go and negotiate one by one bilateral agreements, but it's just not the case for smaller implementers. So looking at pools, there's just no question that that's the most efficient possible path to gaining access to IP rights. And over the course of my career, I've had that many times is small companies, they don't have a deep understanding of IP rights and reach out and ask. We get this on a regular basis, small companies reaching out and asking, what do I need to do to get the license? And the simple advice is just that, is to reach out and to the pool administrators for whatever standardized technologies that you implement.
And I think it's worth mentioning that many pools, and I think VLA as well, has a mechanism where you only start paying from a certain number of devices sold. So you can even become a member not paying, right, as long as you're a startup. But then when you grow and your revenue growth, you have to pay at some point. And you could put that in your books and you can plan ahead. You can talk to your investors and say, if we go beyond that kind of revenue number or number of shipments of products, we may have to pay royalties for it. So pools can also provide some stability in ways of managing the cost for royalties. How much do we have to pay? How can I put some of that into my roadmap and my financial plan? But if there's so much uncertainty, that's a big question mark for me. And pools can, I think, with that transparent pricing, at least provide some transparency and some ways to plan ahead.
Absolutely. And that's something we hear from both large and small implementers or product companies, is that they obviously want the lowest price possible, but equally, they just want to know what it costs.
Yeah, just having that certainty. Thinking about how the markets have evolved and how licensing programs have evolved, maybe you can talk to us a little bit around the merger of VIA LA and MPEG LA and what drove it and what the outcomes have been from it.
When I took the new role at VIA, through the interview process, I had in mind and brought up that it would make a lot of sense for VIA and MPEG LA to merge. There's a lot of similarities. MPEG LA had focused on video, VIA had focused on audio, but philosophy and culture of the two organizations were very similar. They tended to be relatively balanced in terms of trying to find fair outcome for both licensors and licensees. So when I began this role a couple of years ago, this is the first thing that I began working on. I, at the time, gave Larry, who was the CEO of MPEG LA, a call and asked what his plans were and if he'd be open to having a discussion about it. And he took it to his shareholders. And at the time, I think MPEG LA had about a dozen owners, and they were open to the possibility of merging the companies. And so we went through that process. It, like many things in life, it took longer and was more complicated than I would have thought at the beginning. From my perspective, one of the strengths of MPEG LA was that they had already formed a good number of existing programs. So they had over 10 existing pools, some of them really successful, some of them not yet successful, but it created a platform for us to have an opportunity for more opportunities. And so that was one of the things that was attractive to me, and also to expand our success into other areas beyond audio. And so that's sort of the high level logic behind it. There's efficiency in merging those relationships. One of the nice things for us, we had been a wholly owned subsidiary of Dolby, but there were GE, Mitsubishi, and Philips chose to roll over their interest and become shareholders of the merged entity. And so now we have 4 owners and a representative on our board from each of those companies. Those companies happen to be really strong, successful companies with long history of licensing, and having those relationships and having those companies support our programs is really helpful, and having the ability to go bounce ideas and talk about programs with those companies has been really helpful to us.
I think it's great to hear the coming together and the benefits that it brings. Looking at the flip side of fragmentation and specifically around video codec technologies, I guess there has been criticism that maybe there's too many pools for video codec. To give our listeners a bit of an example, there are different stages of video technology. And the initial stage, I guess, which is AVC, there are 2 pools there. Then there's 3 for HEVC and now 2 for VVC. What would be your comments around the fragmentation?
The best possible outcome is finding a path to having a single pool for a particular technology. So there's no question about that. It's nice when that works out. It doesn't always work out that way. What I say to that is that, it's still better to have two pools than no pools, because with two pools, you do have to go take a couple licenses, but with no pools, there's a lot more complication in the world. It's not really a new thing either, because if you rewind time and look at DVD and Blu-ray disc, there were a couple pools for those technologies back in the day. And sometimes the licensors are not able and licensees are not able to agree to a single set of terms. And sometimes the outcome works in a way that results in a couple pools. But I still do think that it's a lot better outcome than not having any.
And Tim, I need to ask you to put your economics hat on in terms of thinking about, is pool consolidation healthy? Your economic theory would tell you, you need to have lots of players in the marketplace. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we can all agree that a less fragmented market leads to more efficient SEP licensing, but I'm 100% supporting what Heath says. It's better to have a pool than no pool. I think what really matters is the coverage of a patent pool. How many patents from the total stack of essential patents to a standard does a pool actually cover? How valuable are these patents or these portfolios covered? I think as an implementer, I would always prefer, of course, large pools with extensive market coverage that offer actual valuable patents. On the other hand, small pools that aggressively license limited set portfolios where the quality of patent is uncertain, these are problematic, of course. As a pool administrator, it's essential to periodically evaluate your pool programs to determine, do they provide value to the implementers? Do they generate revenue for the members? Do they show potential for future success? And I think during the process of pool consolidation, some pool programs may also be phased out. I think we also saw that in VLA or in the merger, that some pools did not make it after the merger, which I think is a healthy and necessary process for maintaining effectiveness and relevance of a patent pool. So overall, I think there's definitely no market failure just because we have two pools. As an economist, I also worry most about adoption. So if I think about adoption, AVC is the perfect example. It's the most adopted video codec standard in the world. It had two pools too, right? So that didn't hinder the adoption. And as Heath says, we have different companies with different business models that you have to basically draft one contract for that covers all their needs and ideas. And sometimes it's just not possible. Sometimes you just have different incentives and different ideas and business models, and you need two pool programs to cover that.
Yep, absolutely right.
And just for our listeners, I'd just like to maybe talk a little bit about setting the royalty rates within a pool. I mean, Heath, obviously, if we're going back to that small SME who's just starting out, how would you explain it to them in a way that would make them feel comfortable and not that daunted?
The pricing is something that's really one of the biggest challenges in setting up a pool program. From our perspective, when we start a program, we look to have something that is acceptable both to licensors and licensees, but also want to find an answer that's acceptable to the marketplace. And the way we get there is by making sure we have both sides involved in the process and finding a royalty and a structure that's acceptable to both sides.
Yeah, I think people should not underestimate this task. To me, it's a major challenge to have different SEP owners agree to a single contract and to a single royalty rate. And this task becomes particularly difficult when we have different business models. For instance, you have some SEP owners that also have products in the market that implement the standard, making them also subject to paying the royalties. For these companies, the patent pool may serve more as a mean to promote implementation rather to really generate revenue from those royalties, leading them maybe to advocate for lower royalty rates. Conversely, you have a SEP owner that is, let's say, primarily an R&D organization that relies heavily on royalty income to fund their research. And these entities may push for higher royalties, even if this results in lower adoption of the standard. So I think from an economic perspective, the ideal royalty rate is where market demands equals market supply. I fully agree that the right price is where the implementer has a good feeling paying that price and the SEP owner has a good feeling with receiving royalties for access to the standards and access to the patents. And that really is based on negotiation, on relationship, on business making. And it doesn't have to be overcomplicated with some economic theory. Even though I'm an economist, I think deal making in our space is still the number one most efficient way to find agreement and to find a balanced approach to SEP licensing.
To jump off of that, as a pool administrator, we really want to find the sweet spot in the market, because if you price too high, what happens is that you end up spending a very long time convincing product companies to take the license. And if you model the economics of that, it really doesn't work out good for the licensors, because all that time you spend fighting is time that you don't get a return on your investment. So that's the one side of it. On the other side of it, you have the implementers really want to be covered. You want to have a pool that's successful. And so the royalty rate has to be sufficiently attractive so that licensors do join the program. And so that's the balance that you have to find. But I would certainly say that in modeling it from the licensor's perspective, it's really important to model the time that you spend gaining market adoption for a new program, because in terms of present value of dollars, it makes a big difference to get licensees in the door as early as possible.
I think that's the main challenge of a patent pool. You have this two-sided market. You have to please the SEP licensors on the one hand, and you have to please the implementers. And one goes without the other. The more SEP holders, the more attractive the program, the more implementers will join. But the question always is who's joining first and who commits to that price and has a perspective looking into the future of maybe not getting royalties right from the beginning, but at some point. And I think that's a lot of what I guess your work at Heath is selling a vision on that this pool program will pick up, that more SEP owners will join, that this will have a good coverage. And if companies join, implementers as well as SEP owners, it will be for the good for the whole market.
Absolutely. In terms of the success of a program, I mean, it is really important to get the royalty rate right. And it's also important to have licensors who are active in the market supporting the program.
We've talked quite a bit about the benefits for licensors and for implementers and even the end consumer, but I'm wanting to focus a little bit on you guys as pool administrators. How important is it to have diversification of what you're offering?
Oh, it's really, absolutely. And that's, like I said earlier, that was one of the really valuable things that we had from the merger with MPEG-LA. And that is that, like any business, you want to have diversification of your revenue. And so, as Tim mentioned, MP3 was a fantastic technology at the time. There's a very successful licensing program, but eventually it came to an end, both because the patents expired and because it was replaced by a better technology. And so it's important for us as a business to have different opportunities for us to continue as an operating company.
Great. Well, listen, thank you for that. And I now get to ask you a question around what you think the future holds.
Oh, I think we sort of touched on it a little bit, but looking forward, I continue to see that there'll be development in new standards with even more market participants contributing. And so looking forward, I continue to see a need for patent pools and frankly, an increasing need for them to provide some of the things Tim mentioned, but the transparency, clarity to the market. So I am optimistic on the prospects for patent pools looking forward.
Great. This was a great session, Heath. Thank you so much for your input. Could you give us your 30 seconds of your key takeaways of this session today, please?
Yeah, thanks. For me, some of the key takeaways are looking at patent pools and the development of technology. I really feel like they're hand in hand and they're sort of mutually beneficial. The development of new technologies continue to become more complicated with more market participants, both as contributors to the technology and as implementers. And that's where patent pools really come in. They provide an opportunity for transparency and clarity for the market. It obviously is helpful for the adoption of technology because companies that want to make a new product really want to build into their product decisions what the cost of some of the underlying technologies are. So looking forward, I feel that it creates a continuing opportunity for the need and benefits of patent pools and see that as a positive opportunity for us looking forward.
Great. I think we heard a lot of great information today. My key takeaway for our listeners is really that we learned how patent pools operate. Patent pools have strong need for market success to function efficiently. I think the success of a pool program heavily relies on how well it meets these market needs. Does a pool, for example, offer valuable patents at a competitive price? Like any product in a market where the best products win because consumers choose them, a patent pool must convince the market of its value. And this value lies in providing access to patents essential for a standardized technology that enables products to communicate, to connect to power, to convert media like pictures, video, audio files to smaller formats. And based on these standardized technologies, we're creating a thriving product market. And I think patent pools serve as a vehicle to streamline and facilitate technology adoption. The objective here is, on the one hand, of course, to collect royalties from users of the standard, and then to distribute those funds to the standards developers, enabling continuous innovation for the next generation of standards. And in complex markets with numerous players, pools are crucial to ensuring SEP licensing does not hinder this adoption of a standard. Conversely, of course, in markets where adoption of a technology standard is unavoidable, pools can gain some market power and increase prices, for example. Although pools are legally just an option, they can still influence the market. So therefore, it's important that determining a price of a pool must follow some economic rationale and balancing of value provided. On the other hand, a challenge for pools is that they cannot enforce directly. They need to encourage their members to enforce patents, which sometimes, I guess, Heath, is creating some challenges for you guys. So this makes managing a pool program very challenging, because any strategy of approaching implementers also must be in some ways, of course, aligned with its pool members. But I think the future of efficient SEP licensing in new industry verticals will heavily rely on patent pools. I also trust that markets will self-regulate. In other words, overpriced, low-value patent pools will eventually disappear, while better pools offering valuable patents at a competitive price will prevail long-term. I think we will have to make sure that we have a supportive legal system and regulatory framework that encourages the formation of pools and enable their success. That will be my takeaway of today's session. Thank you so much, Heath.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the LexisNexis Evolving IP podcast series. Please continue the conversation on social and share your thoughts about today's episode on VIA LA Alliance for Patent Licensing.